Welcome to this episode of True Crime Documented, where we explore the dark and twisted minds of some of history's most notorious criminals. Today, we're going to talk about Charles Manson and the Manson Family, a cult that committed a series of brutal murders in 1969 that shocked the world and marked the end of the hippie era. Who was Charles Manson, and how did he persuade his followers to kill for him? What was the motive behind the killings, and what impact did they have on society and culture? In this episode, we'll dive deep into the story of the Manson family and try to understand how a charismatic conman turned into a murderous cult leader. Charles Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a 16-year-old unmarried mother named Kathleen Maddox. His father was a man named Colonel Scott, who abandoned the family shortly after Manson's birth. Manson never knew his biological father, and his surname was derived from one of his mother's brief marriages to a man named William Manson. Manson's childhood was marked by poverty, neglect, and abuse. His mother was an alcoholic and a prostitute, who often left him with relatives or in foster homes. She was also arrested several times for petty crimes, and once spent a year in prison for robbing a gas station. Manson later claimed that his mother had tried to sell him for a pitcher of beer when he was a child, and that he had been sexually assaulted by a male relative. Manson's troubled upbringing led him to a life of crime and delinquency. He started stealing and running away from home at an early age, and was sent to various reform schools and juvenile detention centers. He was also exposed to religious teachings from different sources, such as his grandmother, who was a devout Christian, and a prison chaplain, who introduced him to Scientology. Manson developed a fascination with music, especially the Beatles, and learned to play the guitar. He also became adept at manipulating and influencing others, using his charm, charisma, and intelligence to get what he wanted. He was described by some as a natural leader and a master of mind control. Manson's criminal career escalated from petty thefts and burglaries to more serious offenses, such as car theft, armed robbery, rape, and pimping. He was in and out of prison for most of his adult life, spending more than half of his first 32 years behind bars. He married twice and fathered 3 children, but none of his relationships lasted. He also had several affairs with other women, some of whom became pregnant by him. Manson was considered so thoroughly institutionalized by the authorities that when he was released from prison in 1967, he asked the warden if he could stay. He later said that prison was his home, and that he felt more comfortable there than in the outside world. But Manson had a different plan for his future. He wanted to become a famous musician, and he believed that he had a special destiny to fulfill. He moved to San Francisco, where he joined the hippie movement that was flourishing in the late 1960s. He began to attract a small group of followers, mostly young women from middle-class backgrounds, who were drawn to his charismatic personality and his unconventional lifestyle. He offered them a sense of belonging, a vision of freedom, and a promise of love. He also introduced them to drugs, especially LSD, which he used to alter their perception of reality and to enhance his control over them. He called his followers his family, and he became their guru, their father, and their lover. He also gave them new names, such as Sadie, Squeaky, and Tex, to signify their rebirth into his world. Manson and his family moved to Los Angeles in 1968, hoping to break into the music industry. He befriended Dennis Wilson, the drummer of the Beach Boys, who invited him and his followers to stay at his house. Through Wilson, Manson met other influential people in the music business, such as Terry Melcher, a record producer, and Greg Jacobson, a talent scout. Manson auditioned for them, and hoped to get a recording contract. He also wrote some songs, some of which were recorded by the Beach Boys and other artists. However, Manson's musical aspirations were not fulfilled, as he was rejected by Melcher and others, who found him too erratic and unstable. Manson felt betrayed and angry, and blamed the music industry for his failure. He also became paranoid and delusional, believing that he was in a cosmic war with the establishment, and that he had a divine mission to save the world from an impending apocalypse. Manson's ideology was a mixture of various sources, such as the Bible, the Book of Revelation, Scientology, the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard, the occult, astrology, numerology, and the writings of Adolf Hitler and Friedrich Nietzsche. He also claimed to have visions and revelations from God, and to possess supernatural powers. He believed that he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and that he had a special destiny to lead his chosen people, the family, to a new world order. One of the main influences on Manson's ideology was the music of the Beatles, especially their 1968 album, The Beatles, also known as the White Album. Manson interpreted the lyrics of some of the songs as coded messages from the Beatles to him, revealing the secrets of the universe and the future. He was particularly obsessed with the song, Helter Skelter, which he believed was a prophecy of an imminent, apocalyptic race war between the whites and the blacks in America. He also believed that the Beatles were the four angels mentioned in the Book of Revelation, who would come to his aid during the war. According to Manson, the race war would be triggered by the black militants, who would rise up and kill the white establishment. However, the blacks would not be able to rule themselves, and would need the guidance of the family, who would survive the war by hiding in a secret underground city in the desert, called the Bottomless Pit. There, they would wait for the right time to emerge and take over the world. Manson claimed that he had access to the bottomless pit, and that he had hidden a map and a key to it in a hollowed-out tree trunk near Death Valley. Manson also believed that he could influence the course of the war by creating Helter Skelter scenarios, in which the family would commit murders and other crimes that would incite the blacks to revolt and also implicate them as the culprits. He called this strategy ATWA, which stood for air, trees, water, and animals, and also represented his environmentalist views. He believed that by creating chaos and destruction, he was actually saving the planet from pollution and overpopulation. Manson indoctrinated his followers with his ideology through various methods, such as lectures, sermons, drug sessions, group sex, role-playing, and mind games. He also isolated them from the outside world, and controlled every aspect of their lives, such as what they ate, wore, read, and listened to. He demanded absolute loyalty and obedience from them, and punished them for any disobedience or dissent. He also gave them new names, identities, and roles within the family, and assigned them tasks and missions to carry out his plans. Some of the members of the family were more devoted and fanatical than others, and formed the inner circle of Manson's trusted lieutenants. They included Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Linda Kasabian, Leslie Van Houten, Bobby Beausoleil, Bruce Davis, Clem Grogan, and Steve Grogan. They were willing to do anything for Manson, even kill or die for him. They believed that he was their savior, their father, and their lover, and that they were his children, his soldiers, and his angels. The Tate-LaBianca murders were a series of murders perpetrated by members of the Manson family on the night of August 8 to 9, 1969, and the following night, in Los Angeles, California. The perpetrators killed 5 people on the first night: pregnant actress Sharon Tate and her companions Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent. The following night, they killed 2 more people: supermarket executive Leno LaBianca and his wife, Rosemary. The murders were gruesome and brutal, involving stabbing, shooting, and mutilation. The killers also left behind messages written in blood, such as "Pig, Helter Skelter," and "Death to Pigs." The murders were widely publicized and generated a wave of fear and panic in the public. They also marked the end of the hippie era and the counterculture movement of the 1960s. The motive behind the murders was unclear and controversial. According to the prosecution, Manson ordered his followers to commit the murders to ignite a race war that he called Helter Skelter, based on his interpretation of the Beatles' song and the Book of Revelation. He believed that the murders would incite the blacks to revolt against the whites, and that the family would survive the war by hiding in a secret underground city in the desert. He also hoped that the murders would implicate the Black Panthers, a radical black nationalist organization that he feared and hated. However, according to some of the perpetrators and other sources, the murders were not directly related to the Helter Skelter scenario, but rather to other factors such as personal grievances, drug deals, revenge, jealousy, and random selection. Some of the victims were known or connected to Manson or his associates, such as Tate, who lived in the house that was previously rented by Terry Melcher, a record producer who had rejected Manson's musical aspirations, and LaBianca, who owned a chain of grocery stores that had once employed a family member. Some of the killers also acted on their own initiative, without Manson's direct involvement or approval, such as Tex Watson, who was the leader of the murder team and the main executor of the killings. The Tate-LaBianca murders were not the only crimes committed by the Manson family. They were also responsible for several other murders and attempted murders, some of which occurred before and some after the infamous nights of August 1969. Some of these crimes were: the murder of Gary Hinman, a music teacher and acquaintance of Manson, on July 25 to 27, 1969. Hinman was tortured and killed by Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Bruner, who wanted to get money and property from him. They also wrote "Political Piggy" and drew a paw print on the wall in Hinman's blood, to implicate the Black Panthers. Beausoleil was arrested on August 6, 1969, while driving Hinman's car, which had blood stains and the murder weapon inside. The murder of Donald Shea, a stuntman and ranch hand at Spon Ranch, where the family lived, on August 26, 1969. Shea was killed by Steve Grogan, Bruce Davis, and Charles Manson, who suspected him of being a police informant and of trying to evict the family from the ranch. Shea's body was buried on the ranch and was not found until 1977, when Grogan revealed its location. The attempted murder of Bernard Crowe, a drug dealer and associate of Manson, on July 1, 1969. Crowe was shot by Manson, who thought he had killed him, but Crowe survived. Manson wanted to get money from Crowe, who had threatened to kill him and his followers after a botched drug deal. Manson also believed that Crowe was a Black Panther, and that his death would trigger the Helter Skelter race war. The attempted murder of Barbara Hoyt, a former family member and a potential witness against them, on September 5, 1971. Hoyt was poisoned by Ruth Ann Morehouse, who laced her hamburger with a lethal dose of LSD, but Hoyt survived. Morehouse wanted to prevent Hoyt from testifying at the trial of Manson and his co-defendants. These are some of the crimes committed by the Manson family, which revealed their depravity and violence. The investigation of the Tate-LaBianca murders was initially hampered by the lack of clues, witnesses, and motives. The police did not connect the two crime scenes, nor did they link them to the murder of Gary Hinman, which had occurred 2 weeks earlier. The killers had left behind few traces of their identity, except for the messages written in blood, which were assumed to be the work of the Black Panthers or other radical groups. The media speculated that the murders were related to drugs, Satanism, or the occult, and that the victims were involved in some kind of sinister conspiracy. The public was terrified and confused, and the celebrities in Hollywood were especially fearful and paranoid. The breakthrough in the case came on October 10, 1969, when the police raided the Spon Ranch, where the Manson family lived, on suspicion of auto theft and arson. The raid resulted in the arrest of 26 people, including Manson and several of his followers. Among the items seized from the ranch were weapons, stolen vehicles, and clothing and jewelry that belonged to some of the murder victims. The police also found a newspaper clipping about the Tate murders, with the word "pig" written on it. However, the police did not realize the significance of these findings, and most of the suspects were released due to lack of evidence or improper warrants. The real breakthrough came on November 18, 1969, when Susan Atkins, who was in jail for the Hinman murder, confessed to a cellmate that she had participated in the Tate-LaBianca murders and that Manson was the mastermind behind them. She also revealed the details of the Helter Skelter scenario and the names of the other killers. Her confession was reported to the authorities, who then corroborated it with the physical evidence and the statements of other witnesses. The police finally had enough proof to charge Manson and his followers with the murders. On December 8, 1969, Manson, Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were indicted on charges of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Tex Watson, who was the leader of the murder team and the main executor of the killings, was in Texas, and was extradited to California in 1970. Linda Kasabian, who was the driver and lookout for the murders, was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony against the others. Bobby Beausoleil, who had killed Hinman, was tried separately and convicted of murder. The trial of Manson and his co-defendants began on June 15, 1970, in Los Angeles. The prosecution was led by Vincent Bugliosi, a young and ambitious deputy district attorney, who had to prove that Manson had ordered and orchestrated the murders, even though he was not physically present at the crime scenes. Bugliosi presented a wealth of evidence, including the testimony of Kasabian, the physical evidence from the ranch, the confessions of Atkins and other family members, and the recordings of Manson's ramblings about Helter Skelter. Bugliosi also played the Beatles' White Album in court, and explained how Manson had interpreted the lyrics as messages and prophecies. Bugliosi argued that Manson was a manipulative and charismatic cult leader, who had brainwashed his followers into killing for him, and that he had a motive to start a race war that would make him the ruler of the world. the defense was hampered by the erratic and defiant behavior of the defendants, who often disrupted the proceedings with outbursts, insults, and gestures. They also shaved their heads and carved excess on their foreheads, to show their solidarity with Manson, who had done the same. They claimed that they were innocent and that they were being persecuted by the establishment. They also tried to discredit the prosecution's witnesses, and to present alternative theories of the murders, such as that they were committed by drug dealers, or that they were part of a conspiracy involving the CIA, the FBI, and the Mafia. They also challenged the validity and legality of the evidence, and the competence and impartiality of the judge and the jury. The trial lasted for 9 months, and was one of the longest and most sensational trials in American history. It was also one of the most controversial and divisive trials, as it exposed the cultural and generational gap between the establishment and the counterculture, and the clash between the values of law and order and the values of freedom and rebellion. The trial also attracted a lot of media attention and public interest, as it revealed the dark and disturbing side of the hippie movement and the 1960s. The trial also featured some bizarre and dramatic moments, such as when Manson jumped over the defense table and tried to attack the judge, or when a spectator named Lynette Squeaky, who was a loyal family member, pointed a gun at President Gerald Ford in 1975 in an apparent attempt to free Manson. On January 25, 1971, the jury found Manson and his co-defendants guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. On March 29, 1971, they were sentenced to death. The trial of Watson, who was tried separately, ended with the same verdict and sentence. However, in 1972, the California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in California, and the sentences of Manson and his followers were commuted to life imprisonment. Manson died in prison in 2017, at the age of 83. Atkins died in prison in 2009, at the age of 61. Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten are still in prison, and have been repeatedly denied parole. The Manson family murders had a lasting impact on the American psyche and culture, as they represented the dark side of the hippie movement and the counterculture, and the breakdown of the social order and the moral values of the 1960s. The murders also exposed the dangers of cults and charismatic leaders, and the vulnerability of young people who were searching for meaning and belonging in a turbulent and chaotic world. The murders also sparked a wave of fear and paranoia, and a fascination with the occult and the macabre, that persisted for decades. The murders also inspired a number of books, films, documentaries, songs, and artworks, that explored the themes and the motives of the Manson family, and the cultural and historical context of their crimes. Some of the most notable examples are Helter Skelter, a 1974 book by Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor of the Manson trial, and Kurt Gentry, a journalist, that detailed the investigation and the prosecution of the Manson family, and became the best-selling true crime book of all time. The book was also adapted into a 1976 TV movie, and a 2004 TV miniseries. The Family, a 1971 book by Ed Sanders, a musician and a writer, that chronicled the history and the ideology of the Manson family, and their involvement in the murders. The book was based on interviews with family members and associates, and included controversial allegations of satanic rituals, drug trafficking, and government conspiracies. The book was also the first to use the term Manson Family to refer to the cult. Manson, a 1973 documentary film by Robert Hendrickson and Lawrence Merrick, that featured interviews and footage of Manson and his followers before and after the murders. The film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, and was praised for its authenticity and insight. The film was also banned in several countries, and was considered controversial and disturbing. The Manson Family, a 2003 horror film by Jim Van Bebber, that depicted the lives and the crimes of the Manson family, from their perspective. The film was a low-budget, independent production, that took 15 years to complete. The film was noted for its graphic violence and gore, and its cult following. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a 2019 comedy-drama film by Quentin Tarantino, that fictionalized the events leading up to the Tate-LaBianca murders, and featured an alternate history in which the murders were prevented by two fictional characters, a fading actor and his stunt double, who lived next door to Sharon Tate. The film was a critical and commercial success, and was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The film also starred Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, and featured several actors playing the roles of Manson and his followers. These are some of the examples of how the Manson family murders have influenced society and culture, and how they have become a part of the American mythology and folklore. The Manson family murders are still relevant and intriguing today, as they raise questions about the nature of evil, the power of manipulation, and the consequences of rebellion. The Manson family murders are also a reminder of the fragility of the human mind, and the need for compassion and understanding in a world that is often cruel and chaotic. This concludes our episode of True Crime Documented, where we explored the case of the Manson family. We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new and interesting. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below. We would love to hear your feedback, suggestions, and opinions. Thank you.